This is a piece of paper that I have coated with an acrylic paint.
So the problem with acrylic grounds for gouache is that the paint doesn't absorb into the paper. And it doesn't surprise me because the acrylic paint is actually a coat of plastic and it's going to resist water. So if you put a very liquid gouache layer on top of an acrylic ground, you're going to see this. The very liquid layer of gouache is beating up on the paper and it's not being absorbed.
There is a solution for that, which is use more pigment and less water. So I'm going to try that. So the drier the brushstroke, the better it would adhere to the painting. However, there are other ways to change that result. So if you want to paint wetter on a acrylic surface, what you need to do is develop the tooth on the surface. And to do that, you can do many different things. But basically what you're doing is you're roughing up the paint layer and sort of taking off the shiny areas and building a little bit more texture on the paper. And you can see this is shinier and this is more matte. It's also lifted up some of the pigment. This is just an emery board, but you can use any kind of sandpaper.
So we know that the drier paint will adhere to this base, and it still does. And then we can try the waterier gouache and see how that works. And that is not perfect, but it disperses the pigments a little better and doesn't beat up. So once the paint layer has a little more tooth, you can use other dry medium. And I'm going to use these watercolor crayons and show you the results on the two different sides. And you can see that they are more or less having the same results. They seem equal. But if you start to use pencil, like these are watercolor pencils, you're going to see a big difference. So the roughed up side shows more contrast. If you like texture, you can actually add more texture to your paper. This is a video describing how I'd go about that.
The first thing actually I want to show you is how to change your gouache into acrylic paint.
I'm going to choose this green because it migrates and I want to actually turn it into a paint that does not migrate, so an acrylic paint.
To turn this into acrylic paint, you need to add an acrylic binder. So we did this in the past where we took glue, but you could also use a satin glaze or glazing acrylic medium.
But I'm going to stick with the PVA glue.
And you don't need a lot.
Now we want to mix it really well. Use your palette knife or a piece of plastic, credit card, ID to put it on the paper.
So the next thing I want to do is show you how to add texture using additives to my paint.
Here I'm using baby powder and mixing it in with the paint. I wasn't able to show the painting, but I have put it in the left-hand box. Now we're going to add things like dirt and salt.
And you could use dirt from outside or sand if you find it, any kind of grit that you're able to get your hands on. So I just went outside and found a little bit of dirt from my garden, and I'm going to mix it with the paint. Not a lot, just a little. And now I'm going to add a little bit more PVA. Sand medium. So again, I tend to not use a brush for this because I don't want to mess up my brushes. And I'm going to lay this down next. And the last thing we're going to try is we're going to mix salt. And I put a little salt in here, not a lot. It's fine salt, but you could use coarse if you have it. So here now I'm adding the salt. Again, not a ton, just a little bit. And once you have it to a place where you got a good serious coat of whatever it is that you got on it, then you want to let it dry. And then we're going to test all these to see what they're like. So I'm testing out these different grounds. This is a ground made with gouache and acrylic or PVA glue. This is that mixture with an additional mixture of powder. This has dirt in it and salt. So essentially I made acrylic paint by putting the PVA into this mixture, which was the gouache, and then kept adding additives, or I added additives to make these have more texture. So we're going to do just a really quick compare contrast. So this is a watercolor crayon, and there is a slight difference between this and this. Just a little bit rougher. This is a lot rougher, and it gives you a totally different effect. Salt works really well as well. Let's try colored pencil. I need something that's contrasty. Okay, so this is good. This is a watercolor pencil. This is the Intense. That looks really good. It feels really good. Nicely done. Dry brush techniques. Flat brush. Actually, this will be just a double loaded brush. I actually think the salt was the most rough, which is really striking to me. I would have thought the dirt would be rougher, but maybe it's just in certain areas it's rougher or drier. Now, when you put a lighter area over a darker area, it's called a scumble. So let's do that. Oops, that's a little too thick. You can play around with other techniques where you're not going to lift the bottom layer. And you can do things like scraping. Let's try that on another one. I'm just going to try it on this one over here. Really nice effects. I wanted to find a Q-tip just for a different mark. So let's do some dots. And this could also be stamping. Now I'm working on just some kind of raking process, which I'm going to use Q-tips to do this. And I just need one more color. And if you want to get really fancy with this, you can glue gun a bunch of the Q-tips to a tool, like a piece of wood, and one. You can play around with that, sort of like. The nice thing about things with more texture is the more texture you put on a page, the more you can add more layers. Let's try one more thing. Oh, I wanted to show you the crayons and the two kinds of marks. So with crayons, which is so nice about them, is that they can make marks this way, right, with like a linear mark, but you can also make long, wide marks. So like this. Using the whole. And that does a nice job. The texture, bringing up the texture in different ways. So it just gives you a lot of more options to play with texture. So try them all.